That's my ex-wife.
A millionaire saw his pregnant ex-wife cleaning tables at his wedding reception. What happened next? Distinguished viewers, welcome to Luxury True Life Stories. Please like and subscribe for more amazing real-life luxury stories. Now, let's get into the story. Timothy Collins grew up in a small, aging apartment on the north side of Chicago, a place where the paint peeled from the walls and the winter winds slipped through the window frames. His father, Edward Collins, had once dreamed of building a successful auto repair business, but years of failed investments had left him drowning in debt. His mother, Margaret Collins, worked long hospital shifts as a nurse just to keep food on the table. Many nights Timothy lay awake listening to his parents argue quietly about unpaid bills, their voices heavy with exhaustion and worry. Watching his parents struggle shaped Timothy in ways he didn't fully understand yet. While other children talked about toys and games, Timothy studied people who wore expensive suits and drove polished cars through the wealthy districts of the city. To him, money meant security, respect, and freedom from the helplessness he saw in his father's tired eyes. By the time he reached his teenage years, he had already made a silent promise to himself that one day he would become powerful and wealthy enough that no one in his family would ever struggle again. Though Timothy carried determination in his heart, he also carried a quiet loneliness. He spent most afternoons studying business magazines he borrowed from the local library, fascinated by stories of entrepreneurs who had built fortunes from nothing. Those stories became his escape and his motivation. While his classmates planned parties and weekend trips, Timothy planned his future. In his mind, success was not just a dream, it was a necessity, the only path that could lead him away from the life he was born into. Little did he know that the path he would take to achieve that success would eventually lead him to love, heartbreak, and choices that would change his life forever. While Timothy Collins grew up surrounded by struggle and pressure, Cynthia Leonard's childhood unfolded in a quiet and peaceful neighborhood in Evanston, Illinois, not far from Chicago. Her home was modest but filled with warmth. Her mother, Laura Leonard, worked as a literature teacher at a local high school and believed strongly in kindness, patience, and education. Cynthia's father had passed away when she was young, so much of her upbringing came from Laura and her gentle grandfather, Arthur Leonard, a retired carpenter who loved gardening and storytelling. From him, Cynthia learned to value simple things, sunlight through a window, the comfort of family dinners, and the importance of helping others whenever possible. Unlike many people her age, Cynthia had always been thoughtful and observant. She loved drawing floor plans and imagining beautiful spaces where families could live happily together. Her dream was to become an interior architect, designing homes that felt welcoming and alive. She spent many evenings sketching designs in a notebook while soft music played in the background. Her friends often described her as calm, patient, and sincere. While others chased popularity, Cynthia cared more about meaningful connections and living a life guided by compassion. The world Cynthia knew was peaceful but not extravagant. Her family didn't have great wealth, yet they had stability and love, something she valued deeply. Her mother often told her, "Success isn't only measured by money, but by the lives you touch." Cynthia carried that lesson with her everywhere she went. When the time came for her to attend Northwestern University, she left home with excitement and hope, believing she was stepping into a future filled with opportunities. She had no idea that soon she would meet someone whose life had been shaped by the exact opposite beliefs, someone whose ambition and hunger for success would both inspire and challenge everything she believed about life and love. At Northwestern University, the campus buzzed with energy as students rushed between classes, clubs, and new opportunities. Timothy Collins arrived with one clear focus: success. He enrolled in business finance, determined to learn everything he could about building wealth and influence. And like many students who enjoyed the social life of college, Timothy spent most of his time studying markets, reading financial books, and attending networking events. To him, college was not just education. It was the first step toward the powerful future he had promised himself. Cynthia Leonard entered the same university with a very different outlook. She chose interior architecture, excited about the creative world of design. Cynthia quickly joined a campus volunteer group that helped renovate community spaces and shelters around the city. She believed that small acts of effort could make people's lives better. During one of these charity projects, where students were repainting and redesigning a children's reading center, Timothy attended the event after being encouraged by a friend who said it would look good on his resume. That afternoon became the moment their lives quietly intersected. Cynthia noticed Timothy standing awkwardly near a stack of supplies, clearly more comfortable in business meetings than with paintbrushes and ladders. With a friendly smile, she handed him a brush and asked if he could help paint one of the shelves. Timothy, unused to such casual warmth, agreed. As they worked side by side, they began talking, first about the project, then about their goals and ambitions. Timothy admired Cynthia's kindness and calm nature, while Cynthia found his determination fascinating. Neither of them realized that this simple conversation, surrounded by the smell of fresh paint and laughter from volunteers, was the beginning of a relationship that would one day shape both their futures. After that first meeting at the volunteer center, Timothy Collins and Cynthia Leonard began seeing each other more often around campus. Sometimes it was by coincidence in the library, other times at student events organized by the volunteer group Cynthia belonged to. Their conversations slowly became longer and more personal. Timothy spoke about his determination to escape the poverty he grew up in, explaining how success and financial security meant everything to him. Cynthia listened carefully, never judging his ambition, though she often reminded him that happiness could come from many things besides money. As weeks passed, their friendship naturally deepened. Timothy found himself drawn to Cynthia's calm presence, something very different from the competitive and stressful environment he was used to. She had a way of making people feel comfortable and valued. Cynthia, on the other hand, admired Timothy's drive and intelligence. She could see that behind his serious and sometimes guarded personality was someone who simply wanted a better life. They began studying together, sharing meals at small cafes near campus, and walking along the lakefront where the quiet waves gave them space to talk about their dreams. Before long, their connection turned into love. Timothy surprised Cynthia one evening by bringing her to a small art exhibition that displayed interior design concepts, remembering how passionate she was about her future career. Cynthia, touched by the thoughtful gesture, realized how much Timothy cared about her. Their friends, including Timothy's loyal roommate Daniel Park and Cynthia's cheerful friend Emily Sanders, quickly noticed the bond growing between them. To everyone around them, they seemed like a perfect balance, Timothy the ambitious dreamer and Cynthia the compassionate designer, two very different people who somehow made each other stronger. By the time Timothy Collins and Cynthia Leonard graduated from Northwestern University, their relationship had grown strong and steady. They had supported each other through difficult exams, late-night projects, and the uncertainty of planning their futures. Timothy's ambition had only intensified over the years, while Cynthia's passion for design had blossomed into real skill and creativity. Though their dreams were different, they both believed they could build a life together. One quiet evening after graduation, Timothy took Cynthia to a peaceful spot along Lake Michigan, a place they had often visited during their college days. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the city skyline, he spoke honestly about his fears and hopes for the future. He admitted that he didn't have wealth yet and that building a successful business could take years of struggle. But he promised that no matter how hard things became, he would never stop working to give them a better life. Then, with nervous determination, he asked Cynthia to marry him. Cynthia didn't hesitate. She believed in Timothy not because of the success he hoped to achieve, but because of the determination and sincerity she had seen in him from the beginning. Their wedding was small and simple, attended only by close friends and family. After the ceremony, they moved into a modest apartment in Chicago. The furniture was second-hand, the space was small, and money was tight, but to Cynthia, it felt like the start of something meaningful. Timothy began working tirelessly to launch his investment business, while Cynthia found a junior position at a design firm. Life was far from glamorous, but in those early days, they were happy, believing their love would be strong enough to face whatever challenges the future held. The first year of marriage tested Timothy Collins more than he expected. Starting a business with almost no financial safety net meant long days and sleepless nights. Timothy spent countless hours studying market trends, meeting potential investors, and trying to convince people to believe in his ideas. His small company, Collins Capital, began in a cramped office space he shared with two other young analysts. The pressure was intense, and many early deals failed, leaving him frustrated and exhausted. Cynthia remained his strongest support during those difficult months. While Timothy worked late nights, she continued building her own career as a junior interior designer. Her projects were small at first, designing office spaces and renovating apartments, but she approached each task with creativity and patience. At home, she encouraged Timothy whenever he felt discouraged. She reminded him that success often required persistence and time. Their apartment was still modest, but Cynthia decorated it carefully, turning the small space into a warm and peaceful home where Timothy could find comfort after stressful days. Eventually, Timothy's persistence began to pay off. A risky investment he managed for a small group of clients turned out to be extremely profitable. Word about his sharp instincts in finance spread quickly among business circles. Within a few years, Collins Capital expanded rapidly, attracting wealthy investors and larger opportunities. Timothy's reputation grew, and so did his income. The young man who once feared poverty was now stepping into a world of luxury and influence. But as his success increased, so did the demands of his new lifestyle, and slowly, almost without noticing it, Timothy began changing in ways that would affect everything he once valued. As Collins Capital continued to grow, Timothy Collins found himself entering a world he had only imagined during his childhood. Business meetings were no longer held in small offices, but in luxurious conference rooms overlooking the Chicago skyline. Wealthy investors invited him to exclusive gatherings, private dinners, and elegant parties where powerful people discussed deals worth millions of dollars. Timothy worked tirelessly to maintain his reputation, determined to prove that he belonged among the city's elite. It was during one of these high-profile charity galas that Timothy first met Susan Kelvin. Susan came from a wealthy and influential family known throughout Chicago's social circles. Her father, Richard Kelvin, was a respected real estate developer, and her mother, Patricia Kelvin, was famous for hosting extravagant social events. Susan herself was confident, stylish, and extremely ambitious. She carried herself with the quiet assurance of someone who had grown up surrounded by wealth and influence. When she was introduced to Timothy, she immediately recognized his rising success in the business world. Susan began speaking with Timothy regularly at these social gatherings, often complimenting his intelligence and business achievements. And like Cynthia, who valued simple moments and emotional connection, Susan spoke about power, status, and influence. She admired Timothy's growing fortune and encouraged him to aim even higher. Timothy, flattered by her attention and eager to strengthen his position among powerful investors, began spending more time in these elite circles. Slowly, without fully realizing it, he was stepping deeper into a world where ambition and status often mattered more than loyalty and love. As Timothy Collins became more deeply involved in Chicago's elite business circles, his daily life began to change. Meetings, investor dinners, and corporate events filled most of his schedule, leaving him with little time for the quiet evenings he once shared with Cynthia. At first, Cynthia tried to understand. She knew Timothy had worked extremely hard to build Collins Capital, and she believed his success would eventually bring stability to their future. But the long hours slowly turned into long absences, and their conversations at home became shorter and more distant. Susan Kelvin continued to appear in Timothy's life more frequently. She attended the same social events, often sitting beside him during dinners or discussing potential business opportunities with him afterward. Susan understood the language of wealth and influence very well. She praised Timothy's ambition and constantly reminded him that with the right connections, he could become one of the most powerful businessmen in the city. Her confidence and glamorous lifestyle made a strong impression on Timothy, especially as he spent more time among wealthy elites who admired her family's reputation. Meanwhile, Cynthia quietly noticed the growing change in her husband. The man who once walked with her along the lakefront now spent most evenings attending luxurious gatherings where she rarely felt comfortable. Cynthia continued focusing on her career, gradually gaining recognition for her creative design work. Yet inside, she felt the distance forming between them. She hoped it was only temporary, believing that once Timothy's business stabilized, things would return to the way they once were. But the world Timothy was entering was already beginning to reshape his priorities, pulling him further away from the life they had built together. Over time, the distance between Timothy Collins and Cynthia Leonard became impossible to ignore. Their once lively conversations had turned into brief exchanges about schedules and responsibilities. Timothy was rarely home before midnight, often returning from business dinners or social gatherings where powerful investors discussed deals that could expand his growing empire. Cynthia tried several times to reconnect with him, suggesting quiet dinners or weekend breaks, but Timothy always seemed distracted, his mind occupied by the next opportunity. Susan Kelvin's presence in Timothy's life had also grown stronger. She often spoke about ambition and the importance of surrounding oneself with influential people who could elevate success. In subtle ways, she began criticizing Timothy's modest lifestyle at home and the quiet simplicity Cynthia valued. Susan believed someone with Timothy's rising status should live among the wealthy elite, attend exclusive events, and build relationships that strengthened power and influence. Slowly, her words began shaping Timothy's perspective. Eventually, the tension reached a breaking point. One evening, after another argument about their growing distance, Timothy made a decision that shocked Cynthia deeply. He told her he believed their lives were moving in different directions and that continuing the marriage would only create more conflict. Despite Cynthia's attempts to remind him of the love they once shared and the struggles they had overcome together, Timothy remained firm in his decision. Within months, the legal process was complete, and their marriage ended. Cynthia left the apartment quietly, carrying only a few belongings and the memories of the life they had once built, unaware that a discovery soon after would change everything about her future. After the divorce was finalized, Cynthia Leonard moved into a small studio apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. The space was quiet and simple, far different from the life she had once shared with Timothy Collins. Though the separation had been painful, Cynthia tried to focus on rebuilding her life step by step. She continued working at the interior design firm where she had slowly built a reputation for her creativity and attention to detail. Most days she kept herself busy with work, believing that staying focused would help her move forward. A few weeks after settling into her new routine, Cynthia began feeling unusually tired and unwell. At first, she assumed it was simply stress from everything that had happened. But when the symptoms continued, she decided to visit a clinic for a checkup. The doctor's words that day left her stunned. Cynthia was pregnant. For a moment, she sat silently in the small examination room, trying to process the news. The child she was carrying was Timothy's, conceived before their marriage had fallen apart. That evening, Cynthia walked slowly through the quiet streets near her apartment, thinking about what this meant for her future. She knew Timothy had already moved on with his new life and powerful social circles. Telling him now might only complicate things further. After many hours of reflection, Cynthia made a difficult decision. She would keep the pregnancy to herself and raise the child independently. Though the path ahead would not be easy, Cynthia believed she had the strength to protect and care for the life growing inside her. From that moment on, her focus shifted completely. She was no longer just rebuilding her own future, but preparing to become a mother. As the months passed, Cynthia Leonard's life became a careful balancing act between responsibility and determination. Her pregnancy slowly began to show, and although she tried to continue working at the interior design firm, the demanding schedules and physical stress became difficult to manage. Eventually, she had to step away from the job she once loved. Losing that position was painful, not only because it had been her dream career, but also because she now needed stable income more than ever. Determined not to give up, Cynthia searched for work that would allow her to survive during this difficult period. After several interviews and rejections, she finally found a position with Bright Star Cleaning Services, a company that provided cleaning staff for large offices, hotels, and event venues. The work was far from easy. Long hours of standing, cleaning, and organizing spaces required patience and strength. Yet Cynthia approached every shift with quiet resilience. She reminded herself that every step she took was for the child she was bringing into the world. Despite the challenges, Cynthia refused to lose hope. During her breaks, she often sat quietly with a small notebook where she continued sketching interior design ideas, refusing to abandon the passion she had once pursued. Her co-workers at the cleaning company, including a friendly single mother named Rachel Moore, slowly became supportive companions who admired her determination. They often noticed how carefully Cynthia worked, even while carrying the growing weight of her pregnancy. Though life had become harder than she had ever imagined, Cynthia held on to one belief that kept her moving forward. No matter how difficult the journey became, she was building a future for her child with strength, dignity, and quiet courage. While Cynthia Leonard struggled to build a new life, Timothy Collins was living in a completely different world. His company, Collins Capital, had grown into one of the fastest-rising investment firms in Chicago, attracting powerful clients and wealthy partners. Timothy's name began appearing in business magazines, often described as a brilliant young financier with remarkable instincts for profitable deals. His success brought him prestige, influence, and a lifestyle far beyond the modest beginnings he once knew. At the center of this new life stood Susan Kelvin. Their relationship had become increasingly public among the city's elite social circles. Susan's family connections opened doors to influential investors and powerful figures, strengthening Timothy's position in the business world. With both of them surrounded by wealth and attention, their upcoming wedding quickly became one of the most anticipated social events of the season. The venue chosen for the celebration was a luxurious lakeside hotel ballroom known for hosting grand receptions attended by Chicago's most prominent families. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, teams of event planners, decorators, and service staff worked tirelessly to prepare the massive reception hall. Elegant chandeliers, polished marble floors, and long tables covered with white silk cloths created an atmosphere of wealth and perfection. Bright Star Cleaning Services, the company where Cynthia worked, was scheduled to handle the cleaning and preparation before and during the event. For Cynthia, it was simply another assignment on her work schedule, an exhausting shift at a large venue. She had no idea that the wedding she had been assigned to help clean would soon place her directly in front of the man who had once been her husband, at a moment when neither of them expected their lives to collide again. The wedding reception hall shimmered with elegance that evening. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm golden light across the polished floor, and the sound of soft music filled the air as wealthy guests laughed and celebrated. Staff from Bright Star Cleaning Services moved quietly around the room, clearing glasses, wiping tables, and making sure everything remained spotless. Among them was Cynthia Leonard, dressed in a simple cleaning uniform, carefully carrying a tray as she moved between the tables. Her pregnancy was now clearly visible beneath the loose uniform, though she worked slowly and carefully, trying not to draw attention to herself. Cynthia had learned to focus on her work and avoid the gaze of guests who rarely noticed the staff around them. To her, it was simply another long evening of work. She wiped a table near the edge of the ballroom, her mind focused on finishing her shift and returning home to rest. Across the hall, Timothy Collins stood beside Susan Kelvin, greeting guests and accepting congratulations on their marriage. The room buzzed with admiration for the successful businessman and his glamorous bride. As Timothy turned to thank another guest, his eyes briefly wandered across the room, and suddenly stopped. Near the tables, he saw a familiar face he had not expected to see again. For a moment he couldn't move. Cynthia stood there, cleaning quietly, her expression calm yet distant. Then his gaze dropped to her stomach, and the truth struck him like a shock. Cynthia was pregnant. Time seemed to freeze around him as confusion, disbelief, and realization rushed through his mind all at once. For several moments, Timothy Collins stood completely still, unable to pull his eyes away from Cynthia Leonard. The lively sounds of the wedding reception, music, laughter, and clinking glasses, seemed to fade into the background as his mind struggled to process what he had just seen. Cynthia, his former wife, the woman he had once shared a small apartment and countless dreams with, was standing only a short distance away wearing a cleaning uniform. But what disturbed him most was the unmistakable curve of her pregnancy. A flood of questions rushed through Timothy's mind. When had this happened? Why hadn't she told him? And most importantly, was the child his? The timeline made the possibility impossible to ignore. Their divorce had happened months earlier, but the realization struck him that Cynthia could have already been pregnant when their marriage ended. Timothy felt an uncomfortable mixture of shock, guilt, and confusion tightening in his chest. Meanwhile, Cynthia noticed Timothy staring at her from across the room. For a brief second, their eyes met again. She could see the surprise and disbelief written clearly on his face. But instead of reacting, she calmly lowered her gaze and continued wiping the table in front of her. She had prepared herself for many difficult moments in life, but she had never expected to see Timothy again under such circumstances. Inside, her heart beat faster, yet she remained composed. She reminded herself that her purpose there was simply to finish her job and return home. Whatever Timothy was thinking or feeling at that moment no longer changed the path she had chosen for herself and her unborn child. Even after the guests continued celebrating around him, Timothy Collins could not shake the image of Cynthia Leonard standing quietly among the cleaning staff. The realization that she was pregnant had unsettled him in a way he had not expected. Throughout the rest of the reception, he tried to remain composed beside Susan Kelvin, greeting guests and thanking business partners who congratulated him on his marriage. Yet his thoughts kept drifting back to the same question: why had Cynthia never told him? Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, Timothy sat alone in a private lounge area at the hotel, trying to clear his mind. It was then that a conversation between two relatives of Susan caught his attention. They were speaking quietly near the hallway, unaware that Timothy could hear them. One of them mentioned something about Susan's medical condition, explaining that Susan had struggled for years with a serious fertility issue. According to them, doctors had confirmed long ago that she would never be able to have children. The words struck Timothy with unexpected force. Until that moment, he had never questioned Susan about starting a family. Their relationship had been built mostly around business influence and social status rather than long discussions about the future. But now, hearing that Susan was unable to have children, Timothy suddenly thought again about Cynthia and the child she was carrying. A deep feeling of regret began to settle over him. For the first time since the divorce, he wondered whether he had made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In the weeks following the wedding, Timothy Collins tried to return to his normal routine at Collins Capital, but something inside him had shifted. The image of Cynthia cleaning tables at his reception while carrying a child continued to linger in his mind. At the same time, the quiet discovery about Susan Kelvin's infertility began to change the way he looked at his new marriage. Questions he had never considered before started to surface. He began noticing small details about Susan's behavior that he had previously ignored. Susan remained focused on maintaining their glamorous lifestyle. She hosted elegant social gatherings, attended charity events, and frequently discussed expanding Timothy's influence among powerful families in Chicago. To her, their marriage represented a partnership of status and opportunity. However, Timothy slowly realized that emotional warmth was missing from their relationship. Conversations between them often revolved around appearances, wealth, and reputation rather than personal dreams or family life. The tension between them gradually became more visible. Susan grew irritated when Timothy appeared distracted or distant during social events. Meanwhile, Timothy found himself quietly comparing Susan's personality with the kindness and patience Cynthia had once shown him during their early struggles. What had once seemed like an exciting new chapter in his life now began to feel complicated and uncertain. Beneath the polished surface of their wealthy lifestyle, small cracks were beginning to form in the foundation of Timothy's new marriage. As the months passed, Timothy Collins found it increasingly difficult to ignore the growing weight of his thoughts. His business continued to thrive, and Collins' capital expanded into new financial markets, bringing him even greater wealth and recognition. Yet a success that once felt so satisfying now seemed strangely empty. Late at night, after long meetings and formal dinners, Timothy often found himself sitting alone in his office overlooking the Chicago skyline, thinking about the life he had once shared with Cynthia Leonard. The memory of seeing her at the wedding reception stayed with him. He remembered the quiet strength in her expression as she continued working despite the shock of their unexpected encounter. What troubled him most was the realization that she had been carrying his child all along while facing life's difficulties alone. Timothy began to question his past choices, how easily he had allowed ambition and influence to cloud his judgment. The more he reflected on it, the clearer it became that he had lost something far more valuable than he had once understood. Meanwhile, his marriage with Susan Kelvin continued to feel distant and strained. Susan remained focused on appearances and maintaining their status among Chicago's elite, rarely noticing the conflict Timothy was struggling with internally. For the first time in years, Timothy began to feel genuine regret for the decisions he had made. The realization slowly formed in his mind that while he had gained wealth and influence, he might have sacrificed the one relationship that had truly been built on love, loyalty, and shared dreams. While Timothy Collins wrestled with regret, Cynthia Leonard continued quietly building a new life for herself. Months had passed since the wedding reception, where their paths unexpectedly crossed, and Cynthia had focused entirely on preparing for the arrival of her child. Despite the physical exhaustion and financial challenges, she remained determined to provide a stable future. Her small apartment had slowly begun to change as well. A modest crib stood near the window, soft blankets folded carefully inside, and small baby clothes were neatly arranged in a drawer she had purchased from a second-hand store. Her work at Bright Star Cleaning Services remained demanding, but Cynthia approached every shift with patience and resilience. Her co-worker and friend Rachel more often checked on her, making sure she didn't carry heavy equipment or overwork herself. The two women sometimes shared quiet conversations during their breaks, sitting in the back room of the cleaning company's office. Rachel admired Cynthia's calm determination and often reminded her that strength came in many forms. For Cynthia, those moments of encouragement helped ease the loneliness she sometimes felt. More importantly, Cynthia had begun rediscovering the confidence she once had before her life changed so drastically. During quiet evenings at home, she returned to sketching interior design ideas in her notebook. Even though she was no longer working at the design firm, she refused to abandon the dream she had once pursued. She believed that one day she would rebuild her career and create a better future for her child. The difficulties she had faced had not broken her spirit, instead, they had strengthened it. Cynthia was no longer simply surviving hardship. She was slowly shaping a new beginning with courage and quiet determination. One quiet afternoon, several months after the wedding reception, Timothy Collins finally made a decision he had been avoiding for a long time. The questions and regrets that had followed him day and night had grown impossible to ignore. After making several inquiries, he managed to locate the cleaning company where Cynthia Leonard worked. Standing outside the modest office building of Bright Star Cleaning Services, Timothy hesitated for a moment, realizing that this meeting could change everything. When Cynthia finished her shift that day, She stepped outside the building carrying a small bag of personal belongings. She immediately noticed Timothy standing near the entrance. For a brief moment, both of them remained silent, the weight of their past hanging between them. Timothy looked different from the confident businessman she had once known. His expression now carried a mixture of nervousness and sincerity. Finally, he spoke, asking if they could talk. Cynthia agreed calmly, though she remained cautious. They walked slowly to a nearby park bench where Timothy began asking the question that had troubled him since the wedding night. Cynthia confirmed the truth he had suspected. The child she was carrying was indeed his. Hearing the confirmation filled Timothy with both relief and guilt. He apologized sincerely for the way their marriage had ended and admitted that he had allowed ambition and outside influences to cloud his judgment. Cynthia listened quietly, her expression steady. Though the past still carried pain, she had grown stronger since those difficult days. The conversation marked the first honest moment they had shared since their separation, and it forced both of them to confront the consequences of the choices that had brought them to this point. The quiet park where Timothy Collins and Cynthia Leonard sat felt peaceful, yet the conversation they had just shared carried years of unresolved emotions. After hearing Timothy's apology, Cynthia remained silent for a moment, carefully choosing her words. She explained that the months after their divorce had been some of the most difficult times of her life. Discovering her pregnancy while rebuilding her life alone had forced her to grow stronger than she ever expected. But through all the hardship, she had also discovered something important, her own independence and resilience. Timothy listened carefully, realizing that Cynthia was no longer the same woman he had once known. She had faced challenges without relying on him and had built a quiet strength that commanded respect. He admitted that his success and ambition had blinded him to what truly mattered. Though he could not change the past, he told Cynthia that he wanted to take responsibility and be present in their child's life if she allowed it. His voice carried sincerity, not the confidence of a businessman negotiating a deal, but the humility of someone who understood the cost of his mistakes. Cynthia looked toward the horizon for a moment before answering. She told Timothy that their future would not be about returning to what they once had. Too much had happened for that. However, she believed their child deserved honesty and support from both parents. If Timothy truly wanted to be part of the child's life, he would need to prove it through patience and consistent effort. For the first time in a long while, Timothy accepted that rebuilding trust would take time. As they stood up to leave the park, both of them understood that their story had not ended, it had simply entered a new chapter shaped by responsibility, growth, and the possibility of a better future for the life they had created together. And that brings us to the end of today's story. The world of luxury often hides stories deeper than what meets the eye. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating stories on luxury jewel stories. Until our next story, take care and stay tuned for more.